Hey everyone, it's Ian for Bold Profits, and welcome to this week's Friday video. This week, I want to focus on some headlines that I've seen in the past week and a half or so about Uber, and they're all super negative, or for the most part at least, they're really negative, really bearish, because Uber reported a pretty big loss for the past quarter, as if anybody really expected them to make a profit at this point, which has been a criticism of that company since they went public a few months ago. And one of the points that I want to make is that Uber, even though they're only about 10 years old as a company, they've already gotten into these huge industries, and they're going to be able to serve billions and billions of people all over the world just within the next few years. And when they went public, they said they were in 63 different countries, and only about 2% of those people in those countries regularly use their services. So they've got a really, really far way to go from here, a ton of growth ahead of them. And they're in these industries that are really, really disruptive and game changing, and they're going to be the future of really what we know with tech and even things like ride sharing, which is expected to be a $220 billion industry by 2025. We've got food delivery, which they are a number one or two in the world in food delivery. So that is expected to be a $162 billion industry by 2024. And then you have autonomous vehicles, which is the smallest of the three, and it's still going to be $29 billion industry by 2024. So within the next few years, these industries that Uber is getting into are going to explode. And at this point, Uber is only worth about $56 billion as a company. And these three industries alone that don't even encompass all of their business are projected to be over $400 billion within the next 5 years combined. So none of this is really being priced in because a lot of people are still focused on the negative, which is that Uber isn't making a profit yet. And that's not even really that big of a deal. But there were some headlines. Some of the weirdest ones that I saw were criticizing Uber for having this $5 billion loss in the quarter, which is technically true, but that's really, really misleading to say that. And the reason that they showed a $5 billion loss, the number one reason is because when a company goes public, they give the insiders, they give the original investors these things called restricted stock units. They're basically rights to shares of stock. And they give them a certain amount of time that they can hold on, and then they say that they can redeem them for shares of stock or cash out at any point after a certain limit. So a few months out, we saw a lot of those be redeemed, and that was about a $4 billion loss. Unfortunately, that goes on Uber's income statement, even though all it was people cashing out these rights to their stock shares. So now there's a whole bunch of new Uber shares on the market, kind of flooding the market with supply. It's driven the stock price down, and it shows a loss on their income statement. So that gives these, like the mainstream media, a lot of fodder to use when it comes to attacking Uber being bearish. So that was about $4 billion of that. And there were a couple other one-off charges on their income statement that led to this $5 billion loss. But it really, the only real loss they had was about $530 million, which is a lot of money. But I mean, this isn't really what we're focusing on at this point in Uber's life cycle. They're 10 years old. They've got so much growth ahead of them. And as I said, nobody really expected Uber to be profitable yet. And if you went back in time, you would see criticism of Amazon losing $720 million in 1999. So Amazon at that point was just getting started, just like Uber is now. They were about the same amount of time into the development of their business, and they weren't even covering as much ground as Uber. So they were mostly focused on book sales and e-commerce and things like that, which turned out to be great, obviously. But Uber is focusing on multiple different industries that are going to be just completely game-changing, just like e-commerce was. So we believe that this is not anything out of the ordinary, that Uber is still okay. They're doing fine. They're going to have a really bright future. And like I said, they only have about 2% of the amount of people in the 63 countries that they're located in routinely using their services. And so Uber really has a really bright future. Again, $400 billion worth of industries that they are really taking control of. They're the number one ride-sharing company in the world. They're in the top few in food delivery, and then they are really breaking through into the autonomous vehicles industry. They just came out with their new self-driving car. So all of these things combined really spells a future of success for Uber. And this kind of gets into my millennial topic of the week, which is ride sharing. And also the fact that millennials and future generations most likely are going to substitute ride sharing for actually getting their own car, driving their own car. So personally, I was just over on the West Coast, and I obviously didn't have a car with me. I didn't rent a car. Instead, I just used Uber, and it was way cheaper than renting a car. I used it about 12 or 13 times the 4 days I was out there. And it's a really, really convenient service. It's much easier, just less stressful overall, really just less annoying than getting a cab. And dealing with all that, you just use the Uber app. It's really easy. Lyft is the same way. And ride sharing overall is something that's becoming huge with millennials. So about 70% of millennials regularly use companies like Uber and like Lyft to get from place to place. And it's also leading to less car ownership. So about 78% of millennials in the US own a car, compared to 91% of Gen Xers, own or lease a car. So just have a car in general, only 78%, and Gen Xers are at 91%. So this is falling pretty fast. And that's a trend that's probably going to keep going, because 20 years ago, about 91% of high school graduates had a driver's license. Now that number is down below 50%. And I had just graduated 9 years ago from high school, and I'm pretty sure that all of my classmates had their driver's licenses, although it's a pretty small sample because I had 19 people in my graduating class. But I'm pretty positive that everybody had their license. It was weird not to have a license when you're graduating high school, 18 years old. You want to be able to get around. At the time, there was no really easy way to have something like Uber. They were just getting started at that point. And so everybody just had their own car to get from place to place. This is quickly falling off. Like I said, less than half of high school graduates today, which is the Gen Z generation, have a driver's license when they graduate. And when you can do ride sharing, call Uber, $5 or $10 a trip, why would you want a car? Or you could just walk if you're in cities. A lot of millennials, 55% right now in the United States, are living in cities. Another 22% are living in suburbs. So really, walking is a big option if you're in the city. Driving in a city, of course, is really stressful, and your car is just sitting there most of the time anyway. So you could walk, you could take something like an Uber or a Lyft. It's just cheaper overall. When you get a car, you got a lot of costs to deal with. You got gas, you got just routine maintenance, you got car insurance, and then you have repairs, which are potentially thousands of dollars worth of repairs that are just unexpected, pop up out of nowhere. So if you're a millennial or a Gen Z person living in a city or a suburb and you don't need to have a car, why would you want to put yourself through all that? The stress of, number one, driving in a city, and the stress of, number two, having all these costs. And being one of the most cost-aware generations, millennials aren't trying to do something like that, and Gen Z won't either. So car ownership is really being disrupted. I mean, that's not even really an industry, but it's still being hugely disrupted by ride sharing. And so this huge disruption that ride sharing is causing is going to have a really, really huge effect over the next 10 plus years. It's a generational transformation that we're seeing. And it's going to really propel growth for companies like Uber and like Lyft. All these ride-sharing companies, I'm sure more will pop up, but it's a huge industry that is growing at an enormous rate and is still largely untapped. So this is a global transformation, not just in the US, but the millennial generation all over the world is bringing this to the forefront, and it's going to be amazing. So once all this negativity passes for Uber and all this fear of disruption and things like that, is going to be a very, very great investment opportunity for the long term. Like I said, generational. So decades and decades of growth for these companies. And that is all I have for this week. This is Ian Dyer saying happy Friday and have a great weekend.